Hi, good evening, and welcome to this evening's live stream from Neurodivergent Labour. My name is Kat. I am Neurodivergent Labour's Vice Chair, and I'll be chairing this evening. Just a few things that we're going to talk about this evening. We're going to discuss some of the issues that are facing neurodivergent people as we approach the local elections. And we're also really honoured today to have a number of guests with us. We have hopefully Joan McDonald joining us at some point this evening, along with Nikki Hughes. We've also got Andrew Berry from Unison, who is also going to talk about some of his experiences with working with the local government. We've got Gethin Jones from PCS, who's going to talk about his experiences within the prison service. We're also really honoured to have Joan Martin, Osime Brown, they're here as well. And hopefully many of you know that we've been supporting the campaign to secure justice for Osime, and it'd be really, really great if you could do some shouts outs to Osime in the chat and comments, and also if you could share our stream on social media so that we can also get some of more of the support for Osime's campaign out there as well. There are also petitions as well. It would be really great if you could support the petition and some of the campaigns around Osime, securing justice for Osime. So I'm going to start with introducing Andrew Berry from Unison. And we've got a couple of questions to ask Andrew tonight. So firstly, Andrew, in your experience, are the current structures of local governments getting the best out of their neurodivergent workers, and are neurodivergent workers really being included in the running of local authorities?
I would say that clearly not, just like any other sector of the workforce or the employment. But I do think that local government, some local government anyway, it's all very, because obviously each council can have its own individual policies, as well as a sort of broad national, what's called the Green Book. But what I would say is that some councils are obviously have better disability policies and refer to the hidden disabilities, not usually using the term neurodiversity, but I think that's something that needs to be developed in councils. And obviously some councils do and local authorities do help employ and support people with neurodiversity, whether it be dyslexia, but I also think, or whether it be autism. But I think also very often those people get very stuck in jobs. There's no promotion, development, support, and needs set around that. And often policies are very much written in a way which is like the sickness policy. How many days off sick have you had? And policies are written in very much a sort of disciplinary process in local authorities, and not so much in a support process. And often they might have good policies on, say, reasonable adjustments, but the reality is most managers in those authorities don't actually know, aren't actually properly trained, aren't aware, and often that's the case. So there is a lot more local authorities can do, especially Labour local authorities, in the area of disability and neurodiversity. And it's certainly, I think, an area that hasn't been pushed as much as it should be. And I think sort of neurodiversity Labour would be a very good place to start pushing that.
Thank you for a brilliant answer, detailed answer to that. So other than what you've already mentioned, what can local authorities do to encourage better representation of neurodivergent people within the actual workplace?
Well, I think, we're dealing with a local government, so we're dealing with elected councillors, and I think it's important to use the structures of not only the unions but also the Labour Party to make sure councils take on better policies and implement those policies. So one of the things I was thinking slightly off beam on that one, but I slightly thinking a lot of things that have been around recently are like charters or manifestos that we talked about, and you've got the national manifesto. But I think what would be really good is having some ideas, some demands, placed on local authority where we list some of the things, much of what's in the manifesto that we say we want this to be legal, we want this to be regulated, but we have an option in local authority whereby we can ask that council to implement those policies now. We don't need to wait for a government to come in and implement policies. So you've got things like the public sector equality duty. We should be insisting that when they're looking at the stats and how they're making sure that their workforce is accessible, jobs are accessible, that people aren't facing unnecessary disciplinary processes, sickness processes, that they can then use that equality duty to find that out and try and support people. So making sure we have access to reasonable adjustments, but also talking, having people with, who are dyslexic, who are autism, etc., in the workplace helps develop their services for the people in the community, and the two things are symbiotic. So if we've got, if we can support people to get jobs as teaching assistants and support them to keep jobs as teaching assistants or teachers, then we'll present not only a workplace that is supportive of neurodiversity, but also a service that is welcoming to the community. So I think we should do that. Council is a huge employer of people, and one of the things that I think it's also an employer. It's also contracts employers, so it's a lot of privatization. But you have things like in care, you have what's called the Ethical Care Charter, which puts demands on the council having minimum standards by which they employ people. So requiring, we obviously want to bring things back into house, but while they're outside house, requiring those contracts to follow certain standards as far as disability and neurodiversity is concerned, so that we can insist that people aren't discriminated, or at least do our best. That also requires monitoring. So I think that that's something that we can do as neurodiversity Labour, but also something we can insist on doing within the Labour Party. And I think it's a job of work to be done. And perhaps, the council election's only next week, but perhaps after the council election, actually that's when we should be getting on with some ideas and putting it through the unions and putting pressure on the unions and taking it into the union, taking what we want, minimum standards that we want from local authorities into the union, and use that pressure and the pressure we have as a Labour Party, and get some of these Labour councils to develop some, gold standard policies in terms of how they support people with disabilities and neurodiversity, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100% behind you. We need all the support we can get from our trade unions in terms of making the workplace fully accessible to neurodivergent people. Thank you so much for those brilliant and interesting answers there, Andrew. I'm going to go to Nikki now. So first question, Nikki, for you. What are the barriers prohibiting neurodivergent people from playing active roles in local government as elected representatives?
You're on mute.
Sorry, I'd muted myself. So I think the barriers are how the media sort of represents disabilities and neurodivergencies, and when we can't play an active role in our local representatives because and being part of that system, because people see disabilities, and especially neurodivergence, as a negative thing. So we're not taken very seriously when we talk about issues, and in regards to a agenda of, especially in like local elections and what local councils deem disabilities are seen as like a something that's like an afterthought, isn't at the forefront when we talk about with local councils. It will be clean air, green spaces, education, housing. Those are all big things that people tend to talk about, not accessibility and disability. So I think society's perception of disabilities and neurodivergences means that a lot of the time our issues are not taken seriously and we're dismissed, and so we don't have a lot of opportunity to go into these spaces and be able to put our perspectives forward and put things that are issues for us forward into the agenda, because I think it's an easier thing to overlook us and dismiss us.
Thank you for that, Nikki. Secondly then, what has to be done to make local governments more representative and enable greater neurodivergent participation?
I feel that definitely local representatives need to go out into the community where neurodivergent and disabled people are, and because I feel like, you know, there are neurodivergent and disabled people who want to be involved and are trying to access these spaces, but we're talking about even doing, you know, something like this. We've seen it in the last year with coronavirus, how many organizations and workplaces have all gone online. That is being able to have neurodivergent people be able to have accessibility to environments that they might not have been able to before. So it's changing things like that and changing your perspective, which will eventually make things accessible for neurodivergent people who will come forward because there is an audience for it, and then we'll be able to change and affect policy and be able to put things forward. Yeah, sorry.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you, Nikki. It's really brilliant to hear that from you, and you have our complete solidarity. And is there anything at all you want to add to that, or anything? Or
yeah, I think for me, I'm Romani, so as a Romani person, we're kept out of spaces and local government and representatives as well. So as part of that, I feel like, you know, being neurodivergent on top of that, we're excluded from a lot of policies. It's easier to, especially being a Romani person, with MPs and representatives a lot of the time using us to gain votes by being quite negative towards us and seeing us as a problem. So as a Romani person and being autistic, I feel like the media needs to change around that viewpoint and how MPs speak about us and see us as human beings. So neurodivergent people and Romani people need to be seen as human and see our issues being brought to the forefront of policies, rather than seen as a performative afterthought. I would like to see, you know, especially in local elections and representatives, you know, either talking about disabled issues and accessibility, and to have representation in my local authority. And it takes people to open the doors to that community for us to be able to put our issues forward. So it takes the step of them opening the doors first and foremost.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. That's really, I think it's really vital that we do remember there's so much intersectionality across so many of these issues, and I'm sure everyone from here sends the GRT community our complete solidarity with some of the issues that you're facing with the current bills that's going through Parliament. So thank you so much for that. I'm now going to go across to John McDonald. Welcome this evening, John. And the first question for you tonight is, obviously you've been a key supporter of neurodivergent Labour since its inception. What was it that made you believe in the goals of neurodivergent Labour, and champion our organisation in the way that you have?
It was the way in which, over a long period of time, I found the scale of discrimination against neurodivergent people actually has been brutal. And I've worked with individuals and people within my community and local community groups, families and others. And there's been so many examples in which people's lives have been, I think, rendered at times almost unlivable as a result of the failure to even recognize neurodiversity. Then in many areas, but for the sort of really courageous and dedicated work of individuals and then groups within our society, and the way in which the sort of state nationally and locally had no recognition or engagement with the issue or developing of policies. So over the years, it often starts, with an individual person you meet, and I've done as a local councillor, then as an MP, just meeting people who are really just struggling. Just things like in the old days, that used to be the statement, and now it's the plan. Just parents trying to get their child assessed in some form to see what additional support they needed at school. And it was like beating your head against a brick wall at times. So I think actually I got motivated by anger more than anything else. And so eventually, then it was about, I need to understand more about this. We all do, because it was becoming so frustrating. And then, of course, I meet with people like Janine Booth, and people know Janine. And once you've met her, you never escape. She basically pinned me down and said, we've got to do something about this nationally as well within the Labour Party. So we set up, a group that worked up the neurodiversity manifesto, and I can't thank Janine enough for that, and all those people who are involved. It was just so inspirational, really. But the frustration I have now is that we haven't come anywhere near where I wanted us to be. And just listening to Nikki there, which I agree was incredibly insightful, really. I'm sorry I was a bit late. I was stuck dealing with a problem in the constituency. But just listening to Nikki there, there's so much further we need to be now. And now we've got these local elections. I just thought this is the opportunity as well to put the issue squarely on the agenda. So when candidates are coming round, or canvassers are coming round, or when you're getting phone called, see which way you're voting, etc., or when you get the leaflet through the door, my view is what we should be saying to people now is, are you willing to sit down with us if you get elected or whatever? Are you willing to sit down with us locally and develop a local manifesto, and then go through all the different aspects of that, engaging with the community, engaging with us to see what is needed on the ground, what is needed locally. And then always, because we've had 11 years of austerity, we know what's happened in many areas. The services have just been wiped out or so overstretched people can't get to them, and they're not adequate. And they were poor enough in the first instance, but after 11 years of austerity, and it's still rolling on, there's another £15 billion worth of cuts coming in public services. So what we've got to do then is say, okay, we understand if there are financial pressures on your local authority, but help us campaign locally and nationally for a change of policy to get the investment. So I think that's where we're at. We need local neurodiversity manifestos. We need local plans developed, but that's got to be done by local councillors and others listening to us, developing it as a result of a detailed process of engagement. And in that way, I think we can move this forward. I'm quite optimistic because I think people are pretty determined now. If you think about it, it's only 4 or 5 years ago, people didn't even, didn't even understand what the term neurodiversity was. We were having to explain it to them. There was no way in which anyone thought we'd ever construct a manifesto at the national level. And it was brilliant. What a huge breakthrough. So I'm optimistic we can do it, but it requires the sort of determination that we've seen from so many people up until now. And we've got to stand firm as well. Nikki's point about the GRT, the Gypsy, Roma and Traveller community, it's a good example about, as you said, this intersectionality that we've got to address so often within our society. So there's a completeness about our approach to how we address these issues. It is about empowerment as well, to be honest. We've got to seize the power to enable us to develop the ideas and the policies that we need. And one way of doing that is to ensure that we get proper neurodivergent representation, either by political office, so elected as councillors and MPs, but also by demanding structures at the local level that we can engage with. So there's proper engagement, consultation, and the development of policies at the very local level. Anyway, that's how I got involved, and that's how really I think I want to see the way forward.
But brilliant, thank you, John. And secondly, obviously these local elections are a really pivotal moment for the Labour Party. What makes UK Labour the party of choice for neurodivergent people wanting change?
Look, I think because we had that huge breakthrough with getting the National Manifesto drafted. And if you remember after that, what Janine and others did is they were trying to engage with every member of the shadow front bench to say, what are you going to do about implementing it? That we didn't go as far as we could have done, I think, and we've got to go further, but there's still that level, there's still a level of engagement. So I think it's such a huge breakthrough to get Labour to adopt that national manifesto. Now what we've got to do is make sure that's sustained, but developed on, actually improved as well. So I think that for me, that was to have a national party like that actually wake up to the issue was a huge breakthrough. So that's why. And I think in talking to Labour councillors and Labour candidates so far, I'm beginning to realise that actually we have a significant breakthrough in raising awareness on this issue. And there is an increasing understanding that they have a responsibility here. And actually it's quite core to what they should be doing once they get elected. So yeah, I'm quite optimistic about all of that, but we still have to be determined, no matter whether it's a Labour council or a Tory council, we still have to be absolutely determined. But I just think now we've had this huge breakthrough, thanks to the work of people on the ground. We've had this huge breakthrough in the Labour Party, and I haven't seen it elsewhere. So that, for me, it's the party that will deliver.
Brilliant, thank you, John, and thank you for everything you've done for us so far at Neurodivergent Labour. I'm now going to go across to Gethin, who is from PCS, and he is going to talk to us a little bit about his experience in the prison service. So firstly, Gethin, you obviously have many years' experience working in the prison service. What do you think could be done to improve outcomes for neurodivergent inmates? I think you're just on mute, Gethin.
I promised myself I wasn't going to mute myself, but I managed to do it. But yeah, it's not just about getting the best outcomes for prisoners. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to get better outcomes for staff as well. Most people who work for the prison service, they don't want to slam doors and shout at people. They want to help people and they want to support people. And when you learn about neurodivergence, it's enriching and you get to learn more about the people around you. But what the prison service really needs is proper bespoke training, and training that comes from people who are neurodivergent, and it's their lived experience. Just to give you an idea, I always think of two guys I work with. One of them had really, really high support needs and one that had quite low support needs. And with the one guy, very high support needs, I thought, oh, great, I work for this agency that's been around for a long time. It's part of this big government department. It's the civil service. We've got all these buzzwords. I'll just access all the training that's available there. There was one sheet of A4 that someone in a psychology department somewhere had drawn up, and it just wasn't adequate. So I was getting people coming to me saying, look, how do we manage and put into place these support needs. And I was like, I don't know how to access it myself. So I had to try and find myself training. I had to find something that would help me to help other people. And it's really, really difficult. And bearing in mind, we've been through 10 years of really, really brutal austerity. We lost staff. Our pay was cut, so we weren't competitive. We had a huge turnover of staff that was there. And then you could see that there's this gaping gap in training that's just not being met by your employer. And at the same time, as trade unionists, we're discovering that our managers don't understand neurodivergence and that they haven't been trained in how to manage their staff correctly. So it's a really, really long way to go. And I think it's not just the prison service that needs a lot of work to do. I know myself individually, even when I've tried to access training myself, I still make lots of mistakes, and I've still got a lot of work to do.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, I think you raise a really valid point there. Training is just absolutely vital. I mean, I work in the education, I'm a teacher, and training is something which I think as well doesn't just need doing once, it needs to be continually updated training as well. And I think that's something that is, as you say, lacking across quite a range of areas and is really vitally important. So as Welsh Labour are in government in Wales, what are Welsh Labour doing differently to the UK government around prison service and neurodivergent?
Again, Welsh Labour have made lots and lots of advancements. It's an absolute pleasure living in a country that's got a democratic socialist government that's led by a democratic socialist leader. I've just been campaigning in a constituency that's traditionally split between Conservatives and Lib Dems, and even that lot, when they don't like Mark Drakeford, they'll still admit he's done an amazing job in the last year, and it's really, really pleasurable. But Welsh Labour, again, we've made lots of advancements in areas like environmental science, lots of different steps forward, but on neurodivergence, there's still a lot of work to be done. We have done the Additional Learning Needs Educational Tribunal Act for Wales. There's been other pieces of legislation, but the main benefits to people who are neurodivergent in Wales are the kind of benefits that we all enjoy. We've managed to protect our criminal justice system by paying for PCSOs, and there's lots of other ways that it's been protected. My learning that I did for my NVQ in understanding autism, that was the Union Learning Fund, which has been cut to the bone by the Conservative government in England. It closed down the Learning Centre in Nottingham, but the Welsh government is still providing that funding for people in unions to get educated and have kind of training that we all hope to benefit from.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, it's really sad what is for the fact that in England the government have cut that fund, because it is a vital source of training for many union reps on a range of issues, including neurodivergent issues and mental health and all sorts of areas. So it is a real loss there, and I'm really glad in Wales you've been able to keep that fund, because I think that fund is just absolutely vital. Certainly as a trade union rep, I would have been lost without that training that I've had through them. So it's just such a shame that in England that's not been protected in the same way. Thank you so much for your answers. We're now going to go across to Joan Martin, who is Osime Brown's mother. And I'm going to ask your questions together because I know one of them is going to be quite short. So firstly, and also obviously, please share our request for solidarity for Osime and for sharing the petition as well. And please sign the petition for justice for him. So firstly, what support was offered from your local authority in Osime's ongoing case? And secondly, what must local authorities do better to support families with dependents with ASD and ADHD?
Okay, first of all, thanks for having me. And the first question will be nothing really. And I'll start by saying you know, what happened to Osime shows a long history of failings by the various authorities and services, and how they have led to the unjust and insane threat of deportation that's still hanging over his head. I will say bluntly that the current system is not working and needs to be turned upon its head, because throwing money into a broken and failed system will not work, will not make the service better, because it's the unprofessional and uncaring individuals in the system, you know, that need retraining, re-educating, policing, and hold accountable or replace. This is the only way we will see meaningful change within the system. If the people in power were paying attention, these injustices would be seen as indefensible. It is not enough to have a seat at the top table. You understand what I'm saying? It's about our voice being heard. We are not being believed, and our concern and our lived experiences are not being looked into nor believed. You know, there's a saying that says they need to listen to us because nothing without us is for us. Take on board what the family is telling them. They're not doing that. Don't instill their belief. Make sure they support and do not go in like bull in China shop and taking vulnerable children away from their families without good and sound reason. Do not neglect and treat like animals the very children that they are supposed to be caring for. Training and better recruitment of staff dealing with disabilities. Also, I would say that there should be accountability, because most of us in the community who have been treated horrific have very little confidence in the system, and this need to address. All throughout Osime ordeal, I was there begging to be listened to, but Osime never get the extra support he needed. There is a culture within the system, and that is this, that professionals know best. And we just need to conform and to what we are told. Sadly, many professionals are far from professionals and often definitely do not always know best. I have spoken to many parents who are affected by this very similar and unfair treatment that my son has been subjected to. So what we are experiencing appear to be more the normal. Some of these institutions have been deemed inadequate, here in and here out, but these doors have been left open to cause more abuse, pain, neglect, and injuries to families. It is good for communities. It is good for committees to come together to make recommendation and to enforce change, but it's a waste of time and resources if these reports are stored on shelves and not acted up on. Those of us with lived experience need to be listened to and believe. This is our perpetual cry. What is the point of creating these legislation and procedure if these people are not held accountable when they neglect their duty of care and responsibility, and in so doing cause harm? I cannot understand why people who have a duty of care can lose humanity. Because, you know, humanity gives to empathy and compassion. They have to use their power, influence, and position to cause harm. This is what they do, and hurt me and my family and other families as well. What is the government going to do about this situation? Throwing monies at it is not the answer. This sort of treatment is enshrined in the system. We speak out against wrongdoing, but we are fobbed off, brushed aside, and given lame excuses. As parents, we have been blamed, judged, criticized, and vilified by those people who purport to have a duty of care. It has been a horrendous experience for our family and still is. And every day we are living in fear and worry about what's going to happen next. We are still having problem with social services. We have a meeting 2 weeks ago. They wanted me to send them my care plan. I haven't responded, honestly, with any such care plan because I am waiting on them to assess the care needs and come up with a standard care plan based upon their assessment. Then I will give my input depending on what they are offering him. However, at the moment, they are appearing to either be stalling or not sure how to deal with his needs. This is one of the reasons why they are failing these vulnerable children in their care. They are very slow to respond to needs. I asked the person who came to assess Osime what service they can offer, and he could not answer. He went on the computer, and a couple minutes later, he was reading out what service they offer to other clients. They are very indecisive in their approach. It is 6 months since Osime has been released and nothing has been put in place for him. He has no care plan for his physical, psychological, or social rehabilitation. Osime has complex needs, autism, learning disabilities, and other needs to be dealt with timely and sensitive. No one wants to probe his complexities. And this is what led him in the situation in the first place, failings after failings. Early intervention is a must to enable autistic and learning disabled people to have a chance at life. This was not afforded to Osime, yet all the time I've been crying out to them for years and still is for help for Osime. Throughout his schooling, during his time in care, Osime was not accommodated. Even in prison, firstly because of his autistic behavior, he was seen as a defiant and disruptive black boy, even though he was evaluated and they strongly worded their findings. And they believe he was significantly below his peers cognitively. He got discipline if he did not understand what was being asked of him, but he never got the help he needed. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that extremely moving speech, and thank you so much for your candid words about the lived experiences of I'm sure many families can identify in many ways with what you've said today, and how I suspect many families also recognise that the early intervention that should be in place for many of our neurodivergent young people is just not taking place. And I understand that within the education system, and thank you just so much for your words there. I think that was very moving and couldn't have said it better. And I think that really got across what the situation is you are going through right now is. I'm going to now we're going to take some questions and answers, and then I'm going to hand over to Will, who is just going to jump in and he's going to direct some of our questions that we've been having on the live chat. So I'll hand over to Will now. And Will, you're on mute.
Headset, that's why. I always go mute on that just in case. Double mute. It's always a good policy until you muck up. Yeah, so we've got about 3 questions in the chat so far. But if you have any questions at all, please just pop a message in. We've got enough time to kind of take a few more questions. So we'll go to Andy's question first. So he asked, as a teaching assistant in an autistic special school, I'm often astonished by the lack of or limited understanding of autism and neurodiversity amongst staff. What kind of initiatives could the trade union movement undertake to engage with the issues of neurodiversity amongst the education workforce? So I think we've actually got a couple of people who are quite well placed to actually answer this question. So I was wondering if there was a preference, whether Andy, Gethin, either one of you two would like to answer that question.
I don't mind starting if you want. So one of the things I would say is I think we need to educate the unions as well in order to support that awareness and increased awareness. Yeah, the unions are in the best place. They do have, certainly Unison has, disability, officers and disability, self-organisation within the union. But I do think we need a much more wider awareness for all the other officers within the union. So I think we need to start with ourselves in that training, so that we can then make those, bring those arguments into the rest of the workforce about awareness. And I think it also goes back to what I was saying earlier. I do think we need, and John mentioned it as well, we need those sort of demands that we want from councils about how they make those awareness available, how both as trade unions but as the community we can put together something which councils can start to adopt and implement, so that our workforce and our community is better represented in terms of neurodiversity and disability in general. Yes. Anyway, that was.
I think John wanted to come in there. I think you're on mute, John.
We all do that, don't we? And we should be used to it by now. Sorry. Look, it's a great question. My answer is follow what RMT did. Every union should follow what RMT did. I used to attend the RMT exec, and at that, Janine Booth raised at the RMT executive that the unions should be addressing this issue. And then she set up training courses for RMT members, RMT reps, and then they could almost then go into their workplaces. And it was RMT reps that were making managers and others aware, employers aware of their responsibilities and how to go about fulfilling those responsibilities. I used to attend those on a regular basis, and they were brilliant. And what was nice about it as well is that people were who are neurodivergent, who attended them, could actually say, I am neurodivergent and divergent, and this is the issues I face, and this is my history. And we all learned from that. So I think every union and the TUC should be running those courses. It's infuriating that the government has cut the Union Learning Fund, and I think that's a real huge setback, and it's typical Tories, isn't it? But that, I think the RMT model really did work. It just raised the level of understanding within one union rapidly, and then it started spreading to others. So I think that should be the standard model.
I think that's a very, very solid point, John, because my own union have only just started doing it as well. And until we get the people educated that, are the people who are challenging management, especially in the workplace, we won't see that sort of broad spectrum change. Got one more question come up. So Monique's put it to the panel. If you could change one thing to improve the outcomes for neurodivergent people in the community, what would that be? So I'm wondering who's going to stick their hand up first for this question. Nikki's smiling, so I might ask Nikki to answer that one.
I would say the one thing that I would change is that for me, we're in 2021. I'm in London. We've just had a Labour London mayor, and he's up for re-election, and it's probably looking like he's likely to win again. And I'm also, my local council is a Labour safe seat since 1997. So for me, I would like to actually see disability and neurodivergencies being taken into the forefront, especially in local elections and in issues being talked about and dealt with. We hear about the environment, housing, all these other issues, which are, just as important. But I would like somebody in all the times that I've lived in in my local council, I have never had during general elections or local elections, anybody come to my door and talk to me about how disability and accessibility and neurodivergencies could be improved. So I would like to see actually it becoming a discussion by our local councils and by Labour, because it's 2021. It shouldn't be an afterthought. It shouldn't be performative of somebody just standing there nodding their head and saying yes, I understand. And I think that's Labour's main problem with Tories. You know what you're getting. They're open about who they are, whereas I think with Labour there's a lot of talk and not a lot of action. So that's one thing that I would like to see change, is that local councils and local representatives are actually talking about disability issues out in the forefront and making it more of a mainstream discussion.
Just to follow up Nikki's point, if I could, one way of doing that, and I think Nikki's exactly spot on, I think one way of doing that is having a legal responsibility on all councils and all government departments to engage with the neurodivergent community, but all to develop a plan for every area. So the local authority has to develop a plan and strategy for neurodiversity within their particular area in every government department, put a legal responsibility on that. That then becomes enforceable if people aren't getting the services. Claire Keenan put in the chat, which I thought was a brilliant idea, training on neurodiversity must be mandatory for all workplaces. Can I just raise one other point? If there is to be plans, etc., the one thing that's impacting upon me I've got a Tory council, the one thing that's impacting upon me at the moment is that trying to get, as we say, it used to be the statement, now it's the plan, trying to get an early years interventions, the point that Joan made, trying to get an early intervention is arm wrestling at the moment, because lots of local authorities are basically turning away the applications for a plan, even though it's recommended by the school or even an educational psychologist, because they're looking at the bottom line of cost rather than actually looking at what that young person needs. And I think we've got to, strengthen the law about making sure that parents and youngsters get access to a properly funded and implemented plan, so that we can really deal with this at a very early age and recognize that it does need resources, additional resources in schools and nurseries and elsewhere. But that's at the moment, I'm finding a real struggle. It's got worse in recent years, to be honest.
I think as well that is one of those things, because it's an absolute postcode lottery with trying to get access to services, especially with young children. I'm very, very lucky in that my daughter's had very, very quick access to services, because we live in a borough that seems to believe in it, but that's not the case for everyone. It kind of chimes into this next question. So is there any legal steps we can take to hold the NHS service commissioners for not meeting the requirements for autism services under the Autism Act? It's clear that my local authority isn't meeting its statutory obligations, but that means for holding people responsible for this is unclear, especially where there aren't partnership boards and up-to-date autism strategies, etc., in place, which kind of sort of adds to the point. It's we can try and put more stuff in place, but there's also the existing issues that we have this existing legislation that isn't being met now. So I'm wondering who wants to answer that question. Next person to smile at me gets it.
I think it's as much about ensuring that there are resources available for individuals and families to challenge the system, as well as the law. So lots of laws have now been put in place, often not implemented. And it's very difficult for an individual or a family to actually challenge the individual body or authority that's not delivering. And part of that is about the cuts to legal aid. So in some instances, it doesn't necessarily need to change the law. It's just making sure people are resourced so that they can ensure the law is properly enforced. Do you see what I mean? It's often saying before we used to have a network of law centres and we had legal aid, and you could challenge the failure of a local authority or a health service body to properly provide the services you need. Now, it's very difficult to do that because it's so expensive going into court. It's so expensive taking legal action. So rather than just changes in law, I'd like to see a much more resourced legal system to enable people to challenge and get their rights, enforce their rights.
Can I sort of say something? Is that okay? Just wanted to say one of the things. I mean, talking about resources, I think working in local government myself and working in social services myself, there's lots of legislation that is passed around, assessments and requirements of care acts and carers assessment, etc. But if you don't have the resources in place, then those authorities struggle to meet those standards. So actually we need to resolve the situation before it gets there. If we don't provide the resources and the cuts that are faced in social services and in local government through the last 10 or so years, what we should be aiming to do is avoid getting to the point where we're having to take legal action if we can. But part of the problem is that those workers are under a massive amount of pressure. And quite often you do the assessment. For example, you do a care assessment for a care assessment, can't actually provide very much. So it feels a bit like, well, what am I doing that for? So those things need to be backed up by something solid, which it's not always the case when the legislation goes through. Just a thought.
Yeah, I agree. I think things are all already in place. Like lawfully, there are things in place that you can do, but like John and Will said, it's the resources and then the taking away of services and law centres that are able to help parents and neurodivergent people to be able to challenge local authorities or the NHS. These complaint processes aren't really taken seriously, and there's nothing you can do. It feels like a never-ending catch-22 because if you do find a service that is out there, they're usually underfunded, overworked, not able to provide support and help. And I feel then the services like local authorities and the NHS take advantage of that in knowing that everything is going to be a long, drawn-out fight. And they can use that time to basically essentially save money, so they don't have to provide that care and support, and they can be seen to be doing something and nothing at the same time, and they hide behind this. So I would say the laws are in place. It's the resources that need to be provided to neurodivergent and their families.
Right, okay, we'll move on to this one. Dylan said, I was diagnosed with ADHD in Nottingham at the age of 30. My care has been entirely medical and entirely through the community-based psychiatric team. Nottingham GPs will not prescribe ADHD medication and psychological support is not offered. Other people I have met around the country have had very different experiences. It seems that diagnostic and care provision is extremely valuable in my region, variable in my region. Has any work been done to establish the different care provisions? Sorry, I've lost my place now because it went off the end then. Provisions, actually, it doesn't actually continue on there. So I can't read the end of that question because it won't let me. That's always smooth. Yeah, so I'm trying to get the general sort of gist of that question. So yeah, has any work been done to sort of harmonise care provisions across all of the different regions, or as has been raised before? Are we still just stuck in this postcode lottery, or is there any work going on to kind of harmonise access across the board?
Can I answer this one?
Mm-hmm.
I noticed Dylan had a question earlier on as well about saying how absolutely torturous boredom is for you and pointing out how difficult it'd be for him in prisons. Yeah, this is a massive problem with ADHD medication within the prison service. You're out in the community, you've got your prescription, you end up in custody, right? Your meds are gone, you're not allowed to bring them in because we don't know if they've been tampered with. Now, you're on a certain ADHD medication that works really well for you. Well, we don't prescribe that inside the prison because it's traded. So then you're given a choice. You could have any of these 9 medications, all of which you might know give you terrible side effects, or, which happens quite a lot, you don't take any medication at all. And this happens between Welsh health boards. And it's even worse if they come over from Bristol. Now, there has been work now between those health boards. They're starting to tie up a little bit better. But yeah, it's really, really disjointed. It doesn't work properly, especially once you're crossing from Welsh NHS into English NHS.
Wow.
Okay, so had someone comment. I would like to see an adult be able to go to a GP and get diagnosis of any neurodivergent condition, including dyspraxia. And I think there are issues around that actually, because I put myself in for an autism referral recently, and straight away I was referred to CBT, and I was asked if I was suicidal straight away, because that was my local NHS assumption was that I had to be feeling suicidal because I thought I was autistic. So there is access to kind of get yourself that treatment, but there's the extra hurdle of you get the assumption that you're mentally ill, which that's something that has to change, especially in my local area. So we've got Jen Roberts. My son had no school from 3.5 years. The school refused to assess him, so I went to my GP, who referred him to CAMS, diagnosed him at 6, but no EHC plan until he was 8, 9. Completely let my child down. We applied for 10 schools. My son was failed and struggling with school now at the age of 14. Unfortunately, that's not an uncommon story. Right, so I'm not seeing any sort of direct questions at the moment. Let me just have a read through. So we don't have any sort of direct questions. We have a lot of similar comments from people. If there's any direct questions that anyone wants to ask, please put it into the comments. We can go through sort of like general comments, but it's easier if we have a question, so then we can sort of dissect it and sort of get into the issue. Let me have a look. So, so we've had no help from the state school at all for my ASD child. We had to have a private assessment, as the alternative was to wait 3 years for CAMS, which we couldn't do. Those who cannot do that are waiting for years for any help or support in some locations. Plus, lockdown has really impacted mental health, and the exam setup is not neurodivergent friendly or inclusive. I think that is actually a very, very valid point that may well be worth exploring about the exam system and how it affects neurodivergent people. Would anyone like to sort of raise a point on that at all? If you could raise your arm.
I wanted to say, as going back to a comment before about being an adult and going through the diagnosis process. So I was diagnosed as autistic as an adult and a couple of years ago, and I was quite lucky in the area that I'm in. I went to my GP, who referred to my local community mental health team, and within 8 months I was able to have an assessment and be formally diagnosed. But it's definitely something that I hear as an autistic adult is the consistency of a postcode lottery, and the fact that, you know, a lot of adults are waiting, and children are waiting sometimes as long as 6 years in some places for an assessment. And having autistic children myself, I also have been in the system for them with their autism and getting ECHP plans. And all this process is that, like, they say it's a lot of this is based on their needs rather than their diagnosis, but the emphasis is very much still on the diagnosis during this process. And that's why, in my opinion, as an autistic person and as a parent of autistic people, and I hear from parents a lot, is, in my view, local authorities and the NHS have these huge waiting times, because ultimately it means they don't have to do anything in the meantime. And there's years and years of children struggling at school, not getting the support that they need, and therefore not getting the education that they need, and then becoming way behind their peers. And this is a carry-on effect through the years into their adult life, because then they're not able to get the jobs because they don't have the skills, because the support was not in place. And it fundamentally, in my view, all comes down to saving money, and we need to see as a priority to have these things diagnosed. I have severe dyscalculia, which means that and dyslexia. And with the dyscalculia, I was diagnosed in school as dyslexic, but as an adult, I can't get a formal diagnosis of dyscalculia, and therefore can't have any support. And when I hear how I struggled in school with maths, and that has transferred into my adult life with being able to work, even go to the shop to be able to calculate the change that I would get, I wouldn't be able to tell if I was shortchanged in a shop, because I wouldn't be able to do that mental maths quick enough. And the support in education, when it comes to things like dyslexia, dyscalculia, dyspraxia, these things aren't being assessed, and they're not being taken care of at school, because they're seen as lesser neurodivergencies and lesser support needs, and therefore the NHS a lot of the time are not diagnosing these. I had to really fight for my son's diagnosis of dyspraxia, and he has severe dyspraxia and needs a lot of support for that, because it means he's constantly falling over, and at risk of very serious injuries and need support in school for that, especially when he's doing physical education. And the fact that even in my local area, they don't diagnose dyslexia and dyspraxia anymore, I think is absolutely ridiculous, that children who are then turning into adults are not getting this support at all. And these things need to be talked about. And it seems that unless you're in that system, unless you are neurodivergent or have a neurodivergent family member, none of this gets talking about. You are unaware of it. Life goes on as normal, and these aren't things that are being talked about. And the system is really, really broken, and it's taken its toll on neurodivergent people and their families who are taking care of them, and it's going under the radar and not being taken seriously at all. And it's frustrating for me to constantly see that this system is broken, hear from parents and other autistic people who talk about their struggles in getting the support, and nobody else seems to be listening. It seems to be that we're all screaming into the wind, and nobody seems to take this seriously. And the whole system needs an overhaul, especially in education. Because and about the exam thing, I'm an autistic person. I have dyscalculia and I have dyslexia. And when I did my GCSEs, I went into a hall with all my peers. I was not offered any support whatsoever, and even in my English and maths exams, the dyscalculia and the dyslexia were not taken into account. So I was marked at the same level as my peers when I have areas of struggle and needed more support. So the exam system is also broken, because how can you know as an educational system that someone struggles with dyslexia and being able to spell and to read, and then assess them in the same level as their peers who do not have these problems? And I was not given any support during my exam. So there were a lot of issues that are just going unspoken and are not being picked up, and we hear this all the time, and somebody needs to start listening. But that's just my take. Sorry, my little rant.
That was really, really spot on, Nikki, actually. Spot on. So I think, bearing in mind the time, we'll probably take one last question before we close down the stream. So we'll take this from Monique. We always hear about diversity drives, as it is known, that gender diversity, ethnic diversity, racial diversity, etc., are beneficial to the workplace. But have any of you ever heard of a neurodiversity being included in these diversity drives? If not, why do you think that is, as neurodiversity has also been found to be highly beneficial to businesses? So I'm wondering who wants to take that one.
I think it's just a lack of understanding of neurodiversity. There's just such a lack of understanding that it's never really been fully appreciated. The range of talents and skills and benefits people who are neurodivergent can bring to different forms of activity in society. So until we get that more thorough understanding, there won't be an acknowledgement in the same way as others, where you are trying to ensure, where you have these diversity drives to ensure that actually your organization, your company, your community group or whatever can reap the benefits of that diversity. And it's something we should raise. I'll start raising it in discussions now, actually. It's a very clever point. It's a very good point, actually. But I think that's what it is. It's a lack of understanding. It's the point you made was, well, you've gone along for, it's reflected in your experience. You've gone along for an assessment and immediately they think just because you're asking assessment, you've got a mental health problem. That's the level of sort of lack of understanding that we've got. So yeah, I think it's a good point. We'll throw it into debate, shall we, and see what the reaction is. Because the whole point about our society is that any organisation always benefits from that range of diversity, and we should be pushing the positive points of it, definitely. Just one final point from me, if this is the final question. The point that Nikki raised is, for me, on all of this now, and the point you raised as well, it is about proper resourcing, but that resourcing needs to be directed by the experience of neurodivergent members of our community. Otherwise, it will be handled to, I suppose, really professionals and others who might want to think they're doing their best, but actually will never fully understand because they don't experience neurodiversity within our society at the moment. That's why I think politically developing manifestos, etc., and sessions like this are so encouraging, because we all learn from them. And the other point that you made as well is this postcode lottery of where you live is dependent on what sort of services you've got. We've got to have some form of national standards that are enforceable, that can enable everyone have access to the full range of services and support that they need. And when they're giving that support, you'll see people give back to society as well, and give back to their local communities in a way which I think helps us all and helps our community thrive and flourish in that way.
Can I just want to say, I think one of the most important things is that the council or the authority or whatever reflects the community. So it's no good if we're providing services and support for members of the public who are neurodivergent, but we don't have any neurodivergent staff. We'll never fully understand what it's like. We won't have those experiences. We won't have those learned experiences of our own. So unless that seems a fundamental part of it. If the councils want to provide better services, and hopefully many of them do, to their community and to neurodivergent members of the community, then they need neurodivergent members of the community to be in the workforce and to be right through the workforce. And the other thing I just want to say, particularly when it comes, it's not quite reflecting on some of the experiences, but later on in the workplace, I think it's important to be aware of of a social model of disability as well. I get it's really important to make sure people get the diagnosis and get those processes, but actually that doesn't stop the council doing, making their workplace accessible for people's needs. It doesn't stop those workforces listening to what's being said and hearing the difficulty those workers are having, and being supported by the union and making those changes, and not waiting for such a piece of paper or that says I've got X, or or I'm autistic or I'm dyslexic. I don't think we should be needing to do that. I think that workplaces should be much more able to support people in a social model as well as a medical model.
I think those were some absolutely wonderful last points, and actually some really, really good sort of closing statements, because I think it's absolutely essential that we continue to have these sorts of debates, and especially in the run-up to elections. So I think we would be remiss if we didn't ask our audience to vote Labour. Bearing in mind we are neurodivergent Labour, absolutely everywhere that they can. So last of all, I'd like to thank everyone who's been watching tonight, but I'd also love to give an extra special thank you to everyone who came onto the stream tonight. I'll just ask, last of all, if you can share the stream, make sure that this is getting out to as many neurodivergent people and families as possible, so we can share this positive message with everyone. And if you can share that petition for Osime Brown, and make sure there is not another unjust deportation going forward. So thank you very much, and have a good evening, and vote Labour.